Welcome to Native Honor Hours. My name is Ed Zendejas and co-host. Should I just introduce you? You probably forgot your name.
Go ahead.
Cindy Krafka. She's working off of what, 20-year-old technology.
iPad.
She might be coming in and out, but then again, she's like that every week. So just be prepared for that. We also have a special guest, Dr. Farina King. Comes to us from Oklahoma by the Dene, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, Yate.
We'll let you introduce yourself. You did a good job of that, Kenny, on our promoting the show. But we'll let Dr. King give us a little background where she's teaching, what she teaches, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Yate. Farina King Yanishet, Bilagana Nishle, Dokia Ani Bashish Chim, Bilagana Dashache, Dosinizini, Dashanale. Caught up on my words there. I was just introducing myself by our Dene clans to say hello to my relatives, kin. It's good to be with you today, and thank you for listening to me. I am, through my mother's side of the family, of English white settler descent, and she's from Michigan. And I'm born for the Towering House Clan, Kia'ani, and Sinajini, Blackstreet Wood People clans of Dene, Navajo Nation, as we call ourselves. And I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation. And my paternal grandfather is the one who's Blackstreet Woods people, and my maternal grandfather is English white settler descent. And my dad's side of the family is from the checkerboard area, as it's known, around Gallup, New Mexico, but not Gallup itself, Rehoboth, Yambato, where I have relatives, Bread Springs, for those from Dene country, Dene Bikeya, who I know. You see behind me the image of where my parents have been living several years in Monument Valley. And so it's one of my happy places, happy thoughts. I am honored and very grateful to live in Jolagee country, Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and the United Cotulla Band of Cherokees in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, where I work and live and work at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah. We have campuses in Broken Arrow near Tulsa, which is Muskogee Creek country, and Muskogee as well, another part of Muskogee country. So it's great to be here at NSU, and we work with students from mostly all over Oklahoma, especially the northeastern part. And you know, there's 39 federally recognized tribal nations in Oklahoma, many diverse Native American and indigenous communities in our area, and we serve over 2,500 Native Americans. Our institution was founded by the Cherokee Nation in the 1850s. So I was humbled when I was saying, oh, the Navajo Nation, they started the first tribal college or the tribal school, and I was wrong. Other tribal nations were starting their own schools much earlier. And so I'm learning a lot here about all these diverse nations and peoples, and it's global studies in a lot of ways, and beautiful. So I'm glad to be here with you today. I teach Native American history. I'm a history professor, but I am also an affiliate of the Cherokee and Indigenous Studies department here. So I teach courses on Native American women's history. I'm teaching a course right now on history of Native Americans in Oklahoma, and oral history, public history, with a lot of the connection with Native American and Indigenous studies. So thanks. I look forward to our conversations today.
Wow, what an accomplishment. It sounds like you're in an amazing place to be Native.
Oh yeah, it's great. A lot going on here, you know, always in the news, reading on these major developments, what Chief Hoskin, a Cherokee Nation, is doing, just signed something about the wildlife preserves that Cherokee Nation has, all the kind of dynamics. It's exciting to follow and to talk to students and be a part of the community.
Is there a lot of discussion about the McGirt case and the jurisdictional issues that are coming up and Oklahoma has to deal with?
Absolutely, all the time. A lot of different perspectives, of course. I think the effort always being an educator, even officially, that educator hat or not, is explaining, educate, educate. There's all kinds of misinformation out there, anxieties, fear of, oh no, what does this mean? Police can't do their job, all the criminals who are going to be released. I mean, real negative talk around it, but actually I find there's many people who are well educated about it, a lot of webinars, so many different resources on podcasts, people who know the history here too, who are helping to explain this, this is what this means. It's opportunity, a chance as well to reconcile and rectify our societies and communities in positive ways and positive directions of, this has been Indian country, and there are, like Navajo Nation, we have our own court systems and everything going on. And you, Ed, have plenty, I'm sure, experience of that. It's not all crazy because a tribal nation and the jurisdiction that they have or the different dynamics they have. So I think it's a lot about conversation and breaking down a lot of power tensions or dynamics that come into that. And unpacking.
One of the things that I have heard, and I know it's a misconception, I've heard people say, oh, they're getting their land back. This is a Supreme Court case that said that they get their land. And I've tried to tell people, they didn't rule that they get their land back.
Yeah.
It's a jurisdictional case that having the authority to have, and it was a very narrow decision. It said that they would have criminal jurisdiction over certain, and the Supreme Court, I think, did that intentionally, I think to alleviate some concerns that people had that all the tribes are going to get everything back. So it's very narrow, but it has implications about civil jurisdiction and other areas as well, because, you can certainly argue that if the tribe has criminal jurisdiction, then therefore they should have, various types of civil regulatory jurisdiction as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably going to take either congressional action or some other Supreme Court case dealing with the civil jurisdiction that might have to clear that up. But for the most part, I hear people say, "Oh, they won, got our land back." I have to tell them, no, they didn't get the land back. Although I'm sure a lot of people in Oklahoma are still very concerned about the jurisdictional issues.
Yes. Yes.
A continuing legal education workshop, and I used to go down there.
Oh, wow.
And she was the head of their tribal governance program.
Great.
And got to, become familiar with her. Very outgoing, just very sharp. And I'm not surprised at all that she, was able to be selected as a dean of a law school. But I will give University of Utah some props for that. But
that is exciting.
other than that, that's all they get from me.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, do you teach? Cindy will tell you, and Kenny will tell you, I start most of my classes out with the Marshall Trilogy. Do you cover that at all by chance?
Absolutely. I teach Native American history, so that's a central part, of course, with understanding, what's the background, how did removal happen, what were, those court cases about, and how foundational they are to law and history, right, of across the board Native American identities in terms of how the United States views them, of course, and that's something I try to point out too, is there's that difference of, right, even knowing what federal recognition means, state recognition, and how a people see themselves and view themselves, and what do all these court systems mean, nation to nation, treaties, the phrase domestic nations, and all that mess. So absolutely, we introduce.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I always get a hard time around here because, he's going to start teaching the Marshall Trilogy again, or he always talks about but for me, I found that you're right. That is foundational. You have to understand the origins of the legal historical relationship between the United States government and tribal government. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that, Cindy, Kenny, you guys always make fun of me for doing it.
And hey, most of them involve Cherokee Nation, right? I think actually all of them did. So inevitably here that we have a lot of
Actually,
students.
the two Cherokee cases, the other one was Johnson versus McIntosh.
Oh, okay. Thanks for pointing
Property
that out.
case. But yeah, we can probably talk about legal stuff all day, but I know we wanted to talk about, since we're talking about diversity and inclusion, that's hopefully the major theme of why we brought you here is Deb Holland, Auntie Deb.
Well, first, I'd like to ask a few questions. Are you teaching? So with COVID, are you teaching in the classroom or are you doing mostly online?
So when everything started to really shut down in March 2020, I've been online and virtual. Even my in-person classes, they moved to synchronous Zoom meetings. So that's what I'm still doing right now is but most of my classes are online asynchronous. And then I have actually only one live Zoom virtual class right now. But in the past, I've had a couple at least. And I'm at a teaching university, so I teach 4 classes a semester.
Wow, I know it's hard to keep the kids engaged when it's mostly or all online because they're checked out. I find that, COVID has hit them too. It's hit their families. I feel like that a lot of kids are just checking out and it's going to be a hard, slow comeback, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I've been aware of, I mean, I think this does relate to diversity inclusion, certainly, because since we are in Jalagi Cherokee country here, Indian country here, and many of our students are affiliated, they are citizens, members of tribal nations and communities. We all know that Black, Indigenous, people of color have been hit disproportionately by the pandemic, just out of the ballpark there and awfully. And so we've had students, we've lost some Native students actually. I don't know if it was to COVID, they don't say, right? There's some hesitation there of what people are saying, but that was really heartbreaking for me. One of the students I had passed away and I was in tears. He was a non-traditional student, United Katua Band. And I remember one time he was in our class and it was a general US history class. And we were talking about Native American identity. Even though I also teach general US history classes, I tell my students, my positionality and lens is as a Native American scholar. So we're certainly going to have that be underlying key part of how we're approaching it, right? That's how US history has often been taught only through one lens of a European American, white settler perspective, looking at only the presidents or whatever. That is already a distortion. So I have to tell my students, we're looking at this from another angle, and there's many different angles to how we can learn and have this class. So I was in a class and what came up was a conversation about Native American identity. And this student, he was a non-traditional, so, wasn't, 21 or 18 or so. He had a family, he was coming back to advance in his education and receive his bachelor's. And he was just so bright and brave, being with a lot of these freshmen, maybe even younger than his children and in there. And he stood up and shared with the class, I'm a citizen of the United Katua Band. And he was just really proud of that and being an example, to the students who might have been more quiet about their identity. And he was open to share that in the class. And it just was powerful for me to see that. So when I heard he passed away this past year, that was really hard and devastating. And we have some students who have had 13 of their relatives pass away. And I've lost an aunt. You know, many of us are feeling this loss, and I'm trying now to support community healing, health, and well-being on our campuses, and especially in a way that acknowledges diverse ways of healing, what that means, especially to Native American and Indigenous students, staff, and faculty in our community. So I'm glad you brought that up. It has been really hard, and we're trying to really address it. How do we grieve? How do we heal from this and everything? Because I'm glad, you know, you are bringing up Deb Holland. There's all kinds of things happening in the world, major changes, but we can't escape this
We can't forget
ongoing
that
pandemic. Yeah.
right. And we can't escape that our friends are passing away and we can't go to their funerals because it's not safe. So we're having culturally our mainstay, our main way of grieving and caring taken away because we come together. And now suddenly we're being pulled apart, and it's really hard to watch the elders walk on without a group to grieve them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So trying to, you know, tell people, I think the most important thing is to tell them you're not alone. How we hate Zoom, we get zoomed out, but it's really been powerful to have some talking circles, meet with people in safe ways outside, you know, be able to see students do what we can. We're still figuring that out. I'm talking to faculty, staff, and students about what do they want to see, what kind of efforts can we do to at least have the conversation. Because I think for a long time, people are suffering in silence and just trying to carry on. So glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And now back to Deb Holland. Let's just get it through the Senate and then I'll believe it.
Well, as I'm sure you're aware, but today there was a vote in their committee, and I think it was 11-9 to move her on to the full Senate. But I was reading some of that, and the only Republican that went along with her nomination was Murkowski out of Alaska.
With clear words of warning to her, though. If I listened to what Murkowski said, and there were clear warning shots sent to her. Murkowski was playing to her native population, but I felt like she would vote for her, but I don't feel like as if she 100% backed her or felt it was right. I think as long as we're talking about the hearings and the commissions, when I was watching them, what struck me blatantly was if she was white or a man, they would not have spoken to her that way. Yeah. I'm tired of every time that she didn't agree with someone, the term radical lefty was thrown at her. This is no time for that. There is no place for this. It's big oil trying to shut down somebody that they think is going to be culturally sensitive and who should be in charge of the Department of the Interior. So I'm sorry, go ahead. My rant is done.
No, I was just saying, absolutely. I sense that too. And I think we were mentioning this earlier of it's not surprising, and that is upsetting, right? Of how we're saying if this were a white man, but that's the point, is she's not, right? And she's changing things up in terms of saying, let's have a Native American woman in this position, one that, to be honest, all this land is Indigenous land and has been impressed and shaped by Indigenous peoples. Yes, it's history is layers. I was just talking to Director Ernestine Berry of the United Kituwa Band of Cherokees yesterday, and she said that, and I've heard it a lot, but it just was so powerful hearing from her as an elder, where she said, history happens in layers. And I think a part of that is that all these layers, it's a part of the world we live in, and that we're navigating. So when people say, well, that's past, you know, let's focus on today, let's move forward. Well, exactly. That's the point. It is past, but it's a part of who we are today. And you can't move forward unless you're acknowledging that and understanding that and how it's shaping your decisions today. And so take off the blinders and recognize that you are discriminating against a person because they're Native American, and it's perpetuating that legacy of dispossession and marginalizing Native American peoples, their beliefs, their mindsets that actually have an integral connection and deeply infused relationship with land, that don't just see land as a resource to be exploited till it's all gone. You know, and this is a big part of the climate change and climate issues that shouldn't be controversial because we all know it's affecting us. People are talking about these extreme weathers, all the issues. I mean, Hollywood, different famous people going in on that. Go ahead, sorry.
Pandemics.
Yes.
I mean, you know, a lot of these things are directly related to climate change, and we're just not looking at it.
One of the issues that, you know, the party is concerned about is the pipelines. And, you know, I teach emergency management classes, and one of our colleagues a couple years back wrote a paper on the pipelines, and it's not a matter of, and this is based on actual data. You know, this isn't just, you know, trying to scare people. It's not an issue of if they will break. It's a matter of when they will break. And the data has shown that the pipelines will break, will leak within the first 10 years and after they're 50 years old. And the majority of the pipelines are over 50 years old, which means you're going to have to replace them with new pipes. So we're at the stage where they're most vulnerable, the old over 50 and under 10. And it's just going to create environmental issues for the sake of, you know, people. It's not that I'm and certainly in Oklahoma, you have to be sensitive about the oil industry. It's not that I'm, you know, trying to, you know, diminish or minimize 11,000 jobs or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
You have to weigh that against the cost of what is it going to do in terms of damage to the environment. And I think, not that you know, I'm sitting here saying, you know, we need to do the Green Deal. All I'm saying is that we need to explore other ways to utilize technology for other types of energy resources. And I think people lose sight of that because of the not understanding what the pipelines are and what damage they can do. And I think politicians are very good at putting labels on things to try to demonize people, and the label of, oh, she's a radical, or you know, is in favor of the Green Deal. Right? I mean, to me, obviously it's not to everybody, but it should be an issue of how do we explore other ways, because, you know, oil is a finite resource. So we need to be thinking long term rather than just what's going to happen within the next couple months. And so I expected her to get demonized. I from what I saw, she was extremely composed, and I think did an excellent job. And the criticism I hear or I read is that, oh, she didn't answer the question. And the question was about what are your beliefs? And I think she was extremely not forceful, but effective in saying, it's not about what I believe, it's about, this is the president's agenda. And as a cabinet secretary, you're not expected to go out and implement your agenda. It's about what does the president want. So, and if you look at, we talk about disparate treatment. You look at the Supreme Court nominations, and you look at the judges that were sitting in front of them. You can ask a judge, how would you rule in this case? What is your specific opinion about this? You don't do that, and they know that. You know, these politicians know what questions you can't ask that are inappropriate, but yet try to ask them anyway, and then say, "Well, she didn't answer my question." And so I find it very disingenuous of politicians who make those claims and then like to put labels on, "Oh, she's a radical. I can't support that." So, you know, I walked away with that, just shaking my head and expecting that to happen. But I was very impressed with her demeanor and how she just kind of swatted her eyes away. Just no, not going to go there. So I'm very very impressed with her. I'm sure she'll do a great job, and I think she'll do her people and all of us proud.
Because every native in America will be watching her.
Absolutely. And the whole country is. I mean,
Yep.
that's the biggest thing we can't take for granted is I remember growing up, and I've lived in a lot of different places. My dad worked for Indian Health Service for many years. And so we did live in the Washington, D.C. area. And I was the only Native American that I knew of in my school with my siblings. And when people found out that I was Native American, they were like, "What? You're not all extinct?" Like, that's what they did say to me. And people they don't know Native Americans, or they have, and that was a part of the representations conversations that we've had, is all they have are those mythologized different images of them. And there's been studies that in curriculum of any teaching, any lesson they have about Native Americans, it's pre-1900. So all the real Indians are dead, right? That myth too. And here you have Deb Holland, a face of a living, breathing Native American, well connected with her community and Native Americans, and showing the world we're still here, and we've shown up at the table. Give us our seat at the table. We are a part of this nation. We have survived, and all those attacks and efforts to erase, eradicate, terminate, exterminate Indigenous peoples, you know, to be Indigenous and Native is to resist, as many scholars and friends of mine have said, because of the waves of trying to absorb and wipe that out, which ties back to, you know, Marshall Trilogy and those conversations of history and sovereignty and peoplehood. Because even before these terms of sovereignty, and where we have these impositions of what are, you know, whose table is it, who creates these political and power structures and systems, it's like we're having to play the games, learn the games to work within the cage. As I've heard scholars say before too, I think that was Yellowbird, Michael Yellowbird, who said that, of we're having to work with what we have to navigate this. And then new peoples are born in that too. Families, relationships, intricacies. So it's not these simple binaries. Here we all are in this space that we now call the United States. And what future is there going to be? What's the direction? And I think what you brought up, Ed, was that always in history, we see this as the ongoing tension, the two-sided sword, the double-face, two-face of tradition and change, conservatism, progressivism, of status quo, especially when it's that inertia, the momentum and force of hegemony, who are people in power who like that power, want to stay in it, keep that privilege and keep it going. And then the peoples who have not been benefiting of that, where it's actually been draining and sucking the life out of them, which is especially in the case of Native American and Indigenous peoples and bodies, in cases that they're saying, nope, that's enough, we need to change this. But more than that, that it's not just even the binaries, right, that I've been talking about a lot lately. People say history's written by the victors, and this kind of victor-loser binary as well. I've been thinking a lot about that, because in different studies and experiences I've had too, is this does matter for everyone. The values, if it really is, you boil down to it, greed, you know, of, as you brought up, let's get this this oil for now, these jobs right now, and not think about the sustainability and not think about the long term, or as many indigenous peoples emphasize, the 7 generations ahead, not having that balance of the foresight. That is so important in this too, of where people's values lie. And it does hurt us. People are hurting themselves when they are acting in ways that it's kind of like the bully, who thinks they're building themselves up by victimizing and taking advantage of another person. And maybe, they're this show of power and force, and they get their pals to surround them and make them feel even more powerful, and they convince them they're in the right, but they're not happy in the end either. They're never going to be satisfied. And why is that? Where's that emptiness coming from? And how can society really, as Americans, if we say unity, everybody's talking about unity, right? With this new presidency, and what does that mean? Well, first of all, I think people need to identify what that really means. What does unity mean? Is it conformity to who you are and the power structure of, what a person has? Or is it really respecting and caring for people, even when they're different from you, and acknowledging that and being able to have that harmony, that interwoven tapestry of what the United States can be and the many peoples of it.
Yeah. You mentioned sort of the perspective, and this is what I tell my students, and if you agree, disagree with the term white privilege. I think students, you hear that, and I said, here's what it comes down to me, because sometimes people say, well, I wasn't born rich, I wasn't, to me, it's not about wealth or money. To me, as I explain to them, it's about being able to control and win the narrative. If you're able to say how things are, if you're able to define history, if you're able to define the power structures, you win. Whoever defines the narrative will win whatever it is at stake. And who has established, and through what eyes, what paradigm has the narrative been crafted and perpetuated over the years. So I always say it's about who can control the narrative. We talked about Indian mascots. We had a discussion, and I had I was on another panel. And it always comes down to, well, this is what we are doing to you or for you. It's not about listening to our voices and trying to learn from us and look at it from our perspective. It's about, that doesn't matter, because what matters is what I'm trying and what I'm saying my perspective is. And for me, I am honoring you.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, and with that, they can proclaim, well, since I'm doing this as an honor, I can continue to do this. And it doesn't matter what you think. So to me, the privilege is controlling and perpetuating the narrative. And you see that, for example, calling Deb Haaland a radical.
Yeah.
It's the perspective of trying to maintain control and to define something as not being something that's desirable or capable of doing the job. So we have to try to define, because she's a threat to the power structure.
Mm-hmm.
And the paradigm of how do we go about protecting our resources and trying to, maintain our society in light of what's going on with our environment and our climate. It's all about, oh, she's a radical, and we're trying to lose jobs, and not going to be good. And so to me, it's about perpetuating that privilege of defining the narrative. So that, I can't stress how, when I try to break down all it, that's what it comes down to for me. And I can shape any argument that someone wants to throw at me with, you're just trying to maintain your perspective. That's, you're utilizing your privilege. Whenever they try to tell me that my opinion or my perspective is wrong or no, that's how I look at things. And don't bring your white privilege in and try to tell me that I'm wrong. From my perspective, this is how it works. and this is how I see things. You may disagree. Now, to me, that's what diversity and inclusion is about. You know, diversity is inviting all of us to the table. Inclusion is allowing all of us to eat and to offer what we bring to the table, and not casting judgments or trying to demonize somebody. So I've seen this in all types of circumstances, and it works in all facets: politics, higher education, everywhere. I see this all the time, and it's very frustrating to me. And you know, people say, well, we want to be united. Oh, we want to have diversity. Oh, we want to have, no, you don't. You really don't. Because if you break it down, it means that from your perspective, you're going to lose something. And they don't want that.
I think what you just said reminded me when we think about narrative and language, especially history, right? History is I mean, if you just think about history, it's just trying to understand what happened, right? But even when everyone like us, we're all in this event and something happens, we do have all this different perspective. And so sometimes people say, yeah, it's all about perspective then, but there is something that happened and you need all those perspectives and pieces. And none of us have that omnipresence as humans, right? We don't have that ability to see all these perspectives, understand every inch and piece of it. So in some ways, it's an impossible task for humans to understand history. So absolutely, it turns into this competition or the tensions over which narrative will become the standard that guides then the lessons people are to learn from that past, the values that are embedded in it. So it's quite interesting if it's that connection of our present stance, looking back on the past, and then how it's shaping our movements in the present and forward in the future. And what you said reminded me of a work, oh goodness, I'm blanking on it. It's Art and Language. Now it's a book about art by Dave Witherspoon, a scholar, Witherspoon, who had married a Dene woman. He was an anthropologist, actually Latter-day Saint, you know, which I found interesting because he had served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, had really immersed himself in Dene communities, and he wrote this book about art and language. And a main argument as he was trying to understand Dene worldviews and dynamics, he emphasized how language makes our world, as he was emphasizing that Dene understand their world. The world is like made by language. The language shapes the world we navigate. And it's almost like we're in a pool and the water that we're swimming in, it's those words, it's those terms, they shape it. So these terms, the language that we also tie to structures that we bring up today, for example, of power and whatnot, it starts with these terms and what they mean. Like, what is radical a bad thing or a good thing? What's the connotation? And even using that moralizing language, good and bad. I see that all the time as people want to, you know, if it's bad, write it off. If it's good, embrace it. So it's kind of the winner takes all kind of language as well, where there's a lot of messiness and intricacies. And I know people get upset at scholars for this, but that's the reality of humanity. We are very intricate, complex beings. We often have walking contradictions. So how do we do the best we can? And I love this has been a real guiding principle passed through my ancestors to me, is Sanagay Bik which is walk in beauty is the basic translation, but that's not even going to get at the principles embedded in that. And what it's meant to my ancestors and my people is life is that journey, and we're seeking Hajo. And there's always these constant cycles and tensions of imbalance. And how do we have that balance, harmony, happiness, you know, being in that right place, the right time and everything. that's what all these dynamics are bringing up. And I think maybe where people recoil or get upset about white privilege is, you know, for me, I'm white, part white too. And people say that to me. And a lot of our native peoples, they have white ancestry and heritage too, or different dynamics. And I understand that my ancestors who were settler colonizers and ancestors, whatever their background were, they made decisions that I hope I would never make, but I hope I will never have to make them and be in those contexts as well, right? So I think people get defensive because they personalize it and they're not understanding you are who you are today. And yes, you inherit traditions, you have that, but what world are you gonna make? You know, do you have to see yourself as sitting on the eggs and guarding them and being defensive when it's like, let's make our world better every day. Let's grow every day and not feel like, yeah, people say I'm not accountable for what my ancestors did, but are you perpetuating what they did? And I think that's what you're getting at with the language of white privilege when it's tied to the actual histories. For example, of, I don't know, a concrete example would be with the histories of Indian boarding schools that I often focus on. How many people can say that they have ancestors who were taken from their home when they're children, like me and my family, my father, taken when he's 5 years old, away from his parents, placed in a school where he does not hear I love you, does not have that care for years on end, and is in a school that teaches him he's inferior, that his language is inferior, the culture, and embeds that. I mean, it's really personal when you think about it. And it helps me to understand why my family and these different dynamics are the way they are. And yes, people say, well, Harry Potter went to boarding school, you know, the elites send their kids to boarding school, but not these kind of schools that are trained to eliminate and extinguish, you know, as David Wallace Adams title, Education for Extinction, to wipe out of people and their culture.
Well, that's one of the things that I've been trying to do with my classes. You'll see students and, you know, freshmen, and you start talking, you know, historical events, and eyes start to glaze over. And so I asked my class, you guys, how many of you guys like history? No one raised their hand. There's one young student that said, how many of you think it's boring? And he kind of goes, I said, that's because it's never been personalized to you. And so what I've tried to do is incorporate the stories of my family, my great grandfather, my grandfather that went through boarding schools, my grandfather wasn't a citizen and served in World War II. And it took an act of Congress to do that. So I try to let them know this isn't that long ago that it happened. My grandfather, there's things today I was talking about, the civil rights era in the 60s. And Cindy was about 20, 30 years old then, but I was a young kid. And
Jackass.
So I tried to explain that this wasn't that long ago. But you're right. We need to continue to stress the importance of that, and I need to make it personalized.
And I love that of the personalization is also our humanizing, you know, these dynamics and empathy. And even if you can't, you know, personalize it directly to yourself, it brings up that relevance. That's not just that these events happened not so long ago, but they are still shaping the world that we are living in and navigating. So a clear example of that what you just said reminded me of, and my experiences too, is I was just talking to my father not that long ago, and I thought I knew where he was born. I thought I had an idea of that. I thought he was born in a Reformed Christian clinic. And he told me it was only recently that he said, because I finally just stopped and checked, because that was on the documents. when I look at different documents for family history and whatnot. And I said, so this is where you were born, right? At this clinic? And he said, no, that's not where I was born. I said, that's in the documents, and he's like, well, that's what they wrote, but I was born in a hogan, the ancestral traditional dwelling of Navajo. And he said, I was born on our homelands up back, like it was behind the hill on the ridge, they're kind of describing back there, of where it was, of not where the homestead, the area where my relatives now live on our family homelands. But they lived further back behind a ridge on lands that they would move between. And he described that area to me. And I said, whoa. And I said, well, what happened? Why isn't our family there anymore? What's going on? He said, well, not long after I was born over there, they had a nurse go and help deliver him. She just wrote that he was born at that clinic. And he said, not long after, the family were forbidden from going there again because the land was poisoned, contaminated by uranium mining that was going underneath, and the family wasn't aware, the dangers of it. Yes, eventually they told them, you need to get out of here, and it's contaminated by the uranium mining and had, and contaminated the water and such. And so it just really blew my mind. I was reading about Monument Valley, and there's Yellow Dirt, a book by Jody Pasternak, for example, that really delves into this, that a lot of Americans don't know this story, that cancer has become an epidemic, widespread among our people. And this is connected to the pandemic. Why do these Black, Indigenous people of color disproportionately, why are we being affected by the pandemic? Is our bodies and immune systems are already compromised because of the everyday violence against us? And yes, people will say, well, who do you point the fingers at? The society is complicit, because what I don't see no evil, I don't hear no evil, whatever, I'm confusing my face. But just because it's this innocent ignorance, if the country through the Cold War and this uranium that is being used under, the United States name, and taxpayers' dollars are paying for this, and nobody's looking or asking these questions of how it's affecting people. And yes, I grew up thinking, when am I going to get cancer? Because it's so prevalent among my family, and it wasn't always like that. We had elders living to the golden age, as we say, among Navajos, of 102 or so. And so there's many of our people now fighting, resisting and calling forth, and there's different acts being passed to finally recognize this, that there have been babies born with uranium in them. My family telling me, yes, I have uranium in me, different tests. But it was really just so in my face. I don't know how to explain it, about this is what my father went through of being removed, and why I was so scared for so long of when I would get cancer. And I still live with that because we've lost so many to cancer so early of our elders. And I lost my grandparents to cancer, and how important that is, of learning the stories, the language from them. And there's that rupture, that happens among our people, and the knowledge systems and such. And that is a form of that violence that's continuing into our present, that we have babies being born with uranium within them. There was a study of this, and that's just one case, right? I'm teaching about the Osage murders of the 1920s. And there's the film, The Killers of the Flower Moon, based on the book David Gron. But I'm assigning my students to read The Deaths of Sybil Bolton by McCullough, Danny, he goes by. Danny. Huh? Oh yeah, you heard
It's
of that.
Excellent book. Excellent.
I recommend read it because again, it shows these ties of people are ignorant. They just don't know about these murders or histories. But get this, is you had a whole community. It was not just a few murderers. It's like these murderers are enabled by the society that's
Yep.
enabling the killings, and doctors were complicit, law complicit. And so I think people have to be accountable, not for, it's like you can't be accountable for the ancestors centuries ago, but what enabling systems are we being complicit about, and just standing by and saying that has nothing to do with me, but people are benefiting from it in some way, at the violence that's continuing against other peoples. And that's a dehumanizing process too. If they're out of mind, they're out of sight, they're not human to me. I don't empathize with them.
Rather than do that, they just say, just get over it.
Yeah.
Ghetto.
Happened a long time ago, just get over it. But before we go, I think we're running up against our hour, right, Kenny? Before we go,
Yeah.
we have a couple little segments we do, and we'll throw something out at you. We have what we call our Knucklehead of the Week, someone who's done just something really stupid and, in Indian country, so we used to call it the Cindy Award, but now we call it the
Does
Knucklehead.
have one. Oh, I have one. I have one this week.
Let's see if Farina has, can you think of somebody that you want to nominate as just a knucklehead? Just,
A knucklehead?
yeah.
So could you give me,
We'll let
what
Cindy
kind of
do it.
example?
We'll let Cindy nominate her knucklehead.
Tom Barrasso from Wyoming. He was one who looked at her in the face and said, I will never vote for a radical leftist, pushed and pushed and pushed. And so, yeah, I would think so. I would say Senator Barrasso from Wyoming gets Knucklehead of the month. Let's go ahead and just do it of the month.
Do you have one, or do you want to?
Good to me. I can agree on that.
Okay, all right. We'll let Cindy win one this week. You have any Indians of the week? Somebody that's done something really good out in Indian country?
Mhm.
Deb
Well,
Holland.
Yeah, definitely. Deb Holland,
I think we had her last week though, and we
She
had
can be this too,
had,
and she can be Indian of the week as long as I decide she will be in the week.
I have been really impressed by Chief Chuck Hoskin. There's been a lot, we didn't talk about this, but there's been a lot of discussion about how the Cherokee Constitution, the proposal to take out by blood in the Constitution over, the histories of controversies regarding Black freed people and descendants and their citizenship. And so this has been heated debates and divisive here in Cherokee country. And I have admired how leaders have been navigating that and taking a lead on healing as well. It's not always the white native binary or Black white. It's more intricate than that. And the histories of where, the five, as they were called, civilized, that 5 tribes were civilized because they had, a part of that was adopting Eurocentric modes of slavery, practices of slavery. And those were the slave holding tribes, at least some of their members, not all of them. So that also shows the intricacies there. And those are, that legacy too, where people say, oh no, like Trail of Tears was not just Native Americans who had to walk and experience all that suffering, but also the enslaved peoples, us Black peoples of those peoples. And so how in today, 2021, what does that mean? This gets at that question of personalizing when people are like, I can't even connect to that. How do we heal and reconcile those pasts? And that's, Cherokee Nation is really facing a lot of hard questions. They're having conversations about of their peoplehood. And I admire those who are navigating it with graciousness and doing the best that they can through all that.
Who was that again?
I said Chuck Hoskin.
If you want to send something to Kenny, he can post it on our page as our Native Indian of the Week. But it was fun having you on. Very good discussion. The best part was that we didn't hear much from Cindy because she's working on an old, what is that, an iPad?
I agree with
2002?
everything she said. In my mind, I was thinking, right on, sister.
All right. Well,
We
we'll
have some comments from Cynthia. If you had, read through those.
go ahead. What do we got, Kenny?
So start off. Deb's such a role model. So excited to see what she does. And then when you're talking about perspective, he said that's why it's called perspective, and gave you some clapping emojis for Ed. Then she also said that when you can create a historical narrative that causes the students to have empathy, it makes the fact that this historical trauma was not that long ago, and that it's just as important as the events of our modern day.
One of our students, Ed.
Gets a whole bunch of hearts for those comments. And then when you're talking about the land, yeah, it's still contaminated and nothing significant has been done.
Yeah.
So,
And that ties to the comments about oil, right? And the pipeline.
Yep.
It's like, are we
Yep.
even making it worse? I mean, we're worsening it, right? With those possibilities.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll need a guest host, because Cindy, we'll have to come back on one of these days.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for inviting me and listening.
Okay, so we're going to head on out, but I'm going to ask you, Dr. King, if you would stay on for a second after we're done. There's some some internal stuff I want to discuss with you, but great having you on the show. And next week, Kenny, we'll see you. Thanks for.
Bye, Lucas.
in.
Grandma loves you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wado.